If you dare to explore the darkest mysteries, subscribe now to Whispers in the Dark. Activate notifications and be prepared to hear whispers that may haunt you even in the silence of the night. Real stories, mysterious events, and spine-chilling tales. But beware, fear will always be your companion here. The Party Trap. I still get chills when I think about that night. It was supposed to be a fun New Year's Eve, just me and my friends, ringing in the new year like normal 20-somethings. The plan came together when Mike, one of the guys, told us about this girl he'd matched with on Tinder. She seemed cool, and when she invited him, and by extension, us, to this party, it sounded like a no-brainer. The address was kind of weird, though. When we looked it up, it wasn't in a residential area or anything. It was some warehouse district on the edge of town. I should have trusted my gut when I saw that, but we all brushed it off. New Year's parties can be in quirky places, right? That's what we told ourselves. When we got there, the place was even sketchier than I imagined. It wasn't a warehouse exactly, but one of those buildings with roll-up storage units. The parking lot was half empty, dimly lit, and the whole area had this deserted vibe. We almost left right then, but Mike insisted. He'd been texting the girl, and she'd promised it was amazing inside. I remember how the cold seemed to seep into my bones as we walked toward the door. The closer we got, the more I felt this pressure in the air, like something was wrong but I couldn't put my finger on it. When we finally stepped in, the first thing that hit me was the smell. Stale beer and something metallic, almost like blood. I'm not sure if it was just my imagination, but I froze for a second, trying to take it all in. The inside was nothing like what I'd expected. The place was dimly lit, with flickering fluorescent lights that gave off this sickly yellow hue. It wasn't decorated for a party. No balloons, no streamers, no signs of New Year's cheer. Instead, there were rows of folding chairs pushed against the walls, like they'd cleared out some other event to make room for us. The music was loud, but offbeat, some kind of distorted techno that made my chest feel heavy. The weirdest part? There were barely any women. Just a bunch of guys, standing around in clusters, talking in low voices or staring at their phones. The whole vibe was off, and I could tell my friends were starting to feel it too. Mike kept saying, "She's probably just running late. Let's grab a drink and wait." The drinks, though, were just as unsettling as everything else. There was this long table near the back with a punch bowl and some cheap beer cans stacked around it. No bartenders, no one even watching it. Mike grabbed a cup of punch, but I couldn't bring myself to drink anything. Something about the way it was just sitting there, unattended, made me uneasy. As I stood there, scanning the room, I noticed someone staring at me. He was older, maybe late 40s, wearing a ratty hoodie, and his eyes had this weird, hollow look. When our eyes met, he didn't look away. He just kept staring, like he was trying to figure me out. That's when the first real wave of fear hit me. I nudged my friend Emma, who whispered, "This place is giving me the creeps." I nodded, but before we could say anything else, that man walked over and leaned in like he was going to tell us a secret. His voice was low and rough, barely audible over the music. "You need to leave now," he said, glancing around like he was afraid someone might hear him. At first, I thought he was just another creep trying to mess with us, but there was something in his tone, this urgency, that made my stomach drop. Emma froze, and I felt her grip tighten on my arm. "Why?" I asked, trying to sound calm, but my voice cracked a little. He didn't answer right away, just looked over his shoulder before leaning in closer. "Just trust me. Get your friends and get out before midnight." Then, just like that, he walked away, disappearing into the crowd like he'd never been there. I turned to Emma, who looked as freaked out as I felt. We tried to tell Mike and the others, but of course, he didn't want to leave. He was convinced the girl was going to show up any second, and he wasn't about to bail because of some random guy's warning. The rest of us were on edge, though. Every second felt heavier, like the air was getting thicker. People were watching us. At least, that's how it felt. Every time I turned around, it seemed like someone was staring, but when I looked directly at them, they'd act like nothing was happening. I remember checking my phone and seeing it was 11:42. Emma whispered, "We have to go." I didn't argue. Whatever was going on, I didn't want to stick around to find out. Convincing Mike to leave turned into a full-blown argument. He kept saying we were overreacting, that the guy was probably just messing with us, but Emma and I weren't budging. I could feel the anxiety building as I glanced around the room. More people were arriving now, all men, and the tension was impossible to ignore. They weren't partying. No one was laughing or even smiling. They were just standing there, like they were waiting for something. At some point, Mike gave in, more to shut us up than because he believed us. "Fine, let's go," he said, rolling his eyes. We started weaving our way back toward the door, trying not to draw attention to ourselves. But leaving wasn't as easy as it should have been. The exit wasn't where we'd come in. I know it sounds crazy, but the layout of the room seemed different. We'd entered through this big metal door near the back, but now it wasn't there. Instead, there was just a blank wall. "This isn't right," Emma said, her voice trembling. Mike started to argue, but then he saw it too. We turned around, looking for another way out, and that's when I realized the crowd had shifted. They weren't just standing around anymore. They were closing in, slowly, like they were trying to trap us. My heart was pounding so hard I could barely think. "We need to find another door," I said, grabbing Mike's sleeve. He nodded, for once not arguing. We pushed our way through the crowd, trying to act casual, but it was obvious people were watching us. One guy actually stepped in front of us, blocking the path. He was tall and wiry, with this creepy grin that didn't reach his eyes. "Leaving so soon?" he asked, his voice dripping with sarcasm. My mouth went dry, and for a second, I couldn't speak. Mike, to his credit, didn't miss a beat. "Yeah, man, we just realized we've got somewhere else to be," he said, forcing a laugh. The guy didn't move, just stared at him like he was sizing him up. Then, finally, he stepped aside. "See you around," he said, and the way he said it made my skin crawl. We finally found another door, a smaller one near the side of the room, and practically bolted for it. When we pushed it open, it led into this dark, narrow hallway that smelled like mildew and old paint. I could hear the music muffled behind us, but it didn't make me feel any safer. The hallway seemed to stretch forever, with just one flickering light above us. My chest was tight, and I could barely breathe. Emma kept whispering, "Hurry, hurry," and I didn't even realize I was holding her hand until we turned a corner and saw it, the exit. A red-lit sign above a door. Relief washed over me, but it was short-lived. From behind us, we heard the sound of heavy footsteps, multiple pairs, coming fast. We didn't look back. I didn't need to. I could feel them closing in. The footsteps echoed off the walls, growing louder with every second. My legs felt like they were moving on autopilot, adrenaline taking over as we sprinted for the exit. Mike threw himself at the door, slamming it open, and we spilled out into the freezing night air. For a moment, I thought we were safe. But then I noticed the parking lot wasn't empty anymore. There were people standing near our cars, men, just like the ones inside, staring at us with that same eerie calm. It felt like we'd jumped out of the frying pan and straight into the fire. "Get to the car," Mike yelled, snapping us out of our panic. We ran as fast as we could, dodging between the parked cars. I could hear voices shouting behind us, but I didn't dare turn around. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped my keys trying to unlock the car. We all piled in, slamming the doors just as a group of them reached us. They started banging on the windows, their faces blank, almost expressionless. It wasn't anger, it was like they were testing us, seeing how far they could push. Mike gunned the engine, and we tore out of there, tires screeching. I kept looking back, half expecting them to follow, but they just stood there, watching us drive away. We didn't stop driving until we were back in the city, the silence in the car so thick it was suffocating. None of us said a word for a while. We were too shaken. It wasn't until we pulled into a gas station, miles away, that we even felt safe enough to breathe. What the hell was that? Emma finally blurted out, her voice trembling. None of us had an answer. Mike was pale, gripping the steering wheel so hard his knuckles were white. "We should call the cops," I said, though even as the words left my mouth, I wasn't sure what we'd tell them. What could we even explain without sounding crazy? That a random guy in a hoodie told us to leave? That a warehouse full of men gave us bad vibes? In the end, we decided to make an anonymous report. Emma called from a payphone outside the gas station, keeping it vague, just a tip about something suspicious happening at that address. We never found out what happened after that. There weren't any news stories about it, no follow-up from the police. It was like the whole thing never happened. But I know what we saw, what we felt. Something bad was going to happen that night, and I don't know if we were the only ones who made it out. I still think about the girl who invited Mike, though. Was she even real? Or was she just bait? We'll never know. All I know is, every New Year's Eve, I can't help but feel this knot in my stomach, like I'm waiting for something to go wrong again. The intruder under the bed. New Year's Eve was supposed to be perfect. My partner and I had spent the whole day prepping our condo for the party. Cleaning, decorating, and setting up a buffet that, honestly, took way too much effort. Guests started arriving around 9 p.m., and by midnight, our place was buzzing with chatter and laughter. Everything felt normal, festive even, until I realized my phone charger was missing. It wasn't a big deal at first. People were milling about everywhere, so I figured someone had borrowed it or misplaced it. Then my partner noticed the Bluetooth speaker we were using earlier had disappeared too. It was weird, but we brushed it off as party chaos. We were wrong. Things started to feel off when one of our guests mentioned seeing a man in a trench coat earlier in the hallway. "Oh, probably someone's +1, I said at the time, dismissing it. But now, looking back, the timeline doesn't add up. Around 1 a.m., someone accidentally bumped our bedroom door open. It wasn't locked, but we'd closed it earlier to keep the party confined to the living room and kitchen. A few people peeked inside to grab coats or bags, and that's when one guy noticed the window was cracked open. We lived on the 5th floor, so it didn't make sense. Why would the window be open in the middle of winter? At that point, I was starting to feel uneasy. I closed the bedroom window, blaming it on my own forgetfulness, but I couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something was wrong. A few minutes later, one of the guests called me over to check something. They'd spotted some of our stuff on the ground outside. Small things, like a couple of books and a framed photo that had been sitting on our dresser earlier. My stomach dropped. It made no sense. Why would those things be outside? I told my partner, and we both ran back to the bedroom to check. The dresser drawers were open, clothes spilling out, and several items were missing. That's when we decided to check the security footage. The condo building had a single camera facing the hallway outside our unit. We crowded around my phone with a few of our friends as we scrolled back through the footage. That's when we saw him. A man in a long trench coat slipping into our apartment just before the party started. He didn't look like any of our friends, and nobody seemed to know him. We watched in stunned silence as he calmly walked into our bedroom. Then, at one point, we saw him rifling through our stuff, pocketing small things and tossing others out the window. My partner gasped when we realized something even more disturbing. The man wasn't caught leaving on the footage. He'd never left. I can't explain the chill that ran through me at that moment. My first instinct was to check every room in the condo. A couple of friends came with me, turning on every light and opening every closet. The party atmosphere was completely gone, replaced by this tense, almost suffocating silence. When we got to the bedroom, my partner stood frozen near the bed. I followed their gaze and saw it. A slight movement, like a shift in the shadows under the frame. I froze too, and for a second, I thought I might be imagining it. Then, unmistakably, there was a sound, a faint scraping, like fabric brushing against the floor. I don't know what possessed me to do it, but I grabbed a broom from the corner and jabbed it under the bed. The scream that erupted was guttural, feral. A man, disheveled, wild-eyed, and still wearing that damn trench coat, scrambled out from under the bed. He was fast, faster than I expected, and before we could react, he lunged toward the open window. My partner screamed, and a couple of our friends tried to block him, but he shoved past us like he had nothing to lose. In an instant, he was climbing out onto the fire escape. Someone shouted to call the police, but by the time I reached the window, he was gone, swallowed by the night. The next few minutes were a blur of chaos. People were panicking, some yelling to lock the door, others rushing to check if anything else had been stolen. I couldn't focus. My hands were shaking so badly that I could barely dial 911. The operator tried to keep me calm, but how do you stay calm when you've just found out someone was hiding under your bed all night? The police arrived about 20 minutes later, by which point most of the guests had left, muttering excuses about needing to get home or just standing around awkwardly, not knowing what to do. I didn't blame them. I wanted to leave too, but this was my home. The officers asked us questions, lots of them, when we first noticed something was wrong, if we had any idea who the man might be, whether we'd seen him before. They took a look at the security footage and promised to investigate, but I could tell by the way they exchanged glances that they didn't expect to find much. One of them walked through the apartment, checking the windows and locks, and finally turned to me with a grim look. He probably planned to sneak out during the party, he said, but when the door stayed crowded, he panicked and hid under the bed instead. The thought made my stomach churn. This stranger had been under there for hours, watching, waiting, while we partied just a few feet away. After the police left, the apartment felt different. It wasn't just the mess, drawers yanked open, scattered belongings, the faint scuff marks on the floor where he'd been hiding. It was the atmosphere. The condo that had always felt safe and familiar now felt like a stranger's space. My partner and I didn't even bother trying to sleep that night. We sat on the couch in silence, flinching at every creak or gust of wind. I kept replaying everything in my head, obsessing over the details. How had he gotten in without anyone noticing? Had he been planning something worse? Every time I thought about how close he had been, under the bed where we kept extra blankets, right beneath us while we celebrated, it felt like I couldn't breathe. The next day, I called the building manager to ask if they'd had any updates. They hadn't, but they mentioned something chilling. A few residents had reported small items missing from their units over the past couple of weeks. Nothing big enough to raise alarms, mostly chargers, keys, or random trinkets. At the time, everyone assumed they'd just misplaced things. Now, it seemed like this guy had been sneaking into apartments for a while. Maybe he wasn't just targeting us that night. Maybe we'd caught him mid-ritual, something he'd been doing without anyone noticing. I still don't know how long he was under there, but the thought of him watching us, knowing we were clueless, still makes my skin crawl. In the weeks that followed, we did everything we could to feel safe again. We changed the locks, installed a new security system, and even bought one of those doorstop alarms for the bedroom. But the feeling of violation didn't go away. Every time I walked into the room, I'd catch myself glancing at the bed, half expecting to see a shadow shifting underneath it. Sleeping was the worst. Every creak of the floorboards or distant sound from the hallway had me wide awake, heart racing. My partner tried to stay calm for both of us, but I could tell they were just as shaken. It wasn't just fear, it was the realization that someone had been so close, invading our most private space, and we never even noticed. The police never found him. No arrests, no updates. It was like he disappeared into thin air that night. Every now and then, I wonder what he wanted. Was it just the thrill of sneaking around, or did he have something darker planned? I still get chills thinking about it. That man had been right under our bed, listening to us, waiting for the right moment. I can't explain it, but sometimes I feel like he's still out there, watching, maybe even planning his next move. It's been months now, but I still can't look at that bed without imagining him there. Silent, hidden, and far too close.